Team 3DMJ Nation. How's it going today? I am joined by Coach. Jeff, I'm going to be calling you Coach probably for a long time now. I can't help it. But how are you doing today, Coach?
Good. We're going to be two grandpas on a rocking chair in like 20 or 30 years, and you'll call me Coach.
I will.
So like, how much protein should I eat, Coach? You'll say, how much fiber I should be taking because I'm all backed up.
Yeah. How much of my medication should I be taking, Coach? What am I going to do to surprise my wife this year for her birthday? Because I've been coached up by the Godfather in that area too. So
you got to leave those little special notes, next to the coffee maker, Brad. So that way when she gets her coffee in the morning, she feels special first thing.
Okay. See, what a good coach you are, Jeff. Today we're going to talk about how do you know if you are or not made for bodybuilding? And everybody's going to think that we're going to talk about genetics and structure and all that stuff. And while we are going to do that, I really want to kind of talk more about the non-physical tangibles to know when you're made for bodybuilding. But we might as well start, right? Because everybody's going to want about genetics, and we're going to talk about bone structure and all that kind of good stuff. And Jeff, before we got on the call here, you kind of took this right where most people think that we were going to be taking this, talking about Brad's wide bony pelvis and wide hips and how
your wide hips.
I got them
you can
birthing
shake it
hips.
You can shake it like You shake it like Shakira. It's your next posing routine, by the way, right there. You shake those hips.
Shake those hips. Yeah. Well, I don't. If I can figure out how to do it, I got the hips to do it, right? But yeah, I mean, when we're talking about bone structure, I mean, I am not built for bodybuilding. I've got basically big joints, big pelvis, really hard to show V-taper on the bodybuilding stage. By all means, I probably shouldn't even be a bodybuilder, but that was my sport that I chose. And I don't know, Jeff, you tell me. I felt like I did a pretty good job of kind of playing with the hand that I was dealt.
100%.
Yeah.
I think through the years that I've known you, it always seemed like you've maximized your potential, like the current potential. Like looking back at your amateur career, like you said, like the wide hips, you're at a disadvantage against bodybuilders who are more genetically gifted, smaller waistlines, broader clavicles, and, just that pleasing X frame that, you're kind of born with. But you maximize your conditioning. Like you put on as much muscle as you possibly could. And you just really brought that elite level conditioning as an amateur. And in a sense, I think, at least on the West Coast, like you were kind of the guy that's known for bringing in like shredded glutes. Like that was a little more rare back then. And you were beating more gifted bodybuilders because of your commitment to that level of just your work ethic. Like you're just, in a sense, like outworking people in that department. So you kind of went a long ways without having like elite level genetics, which is a testament to the mentality that goes into being a bodybuilder, right?
And you took that right where I wanted to go, Jeff. You took that right where I wanted to go. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted you there.
I was saying on the flip side, like I'm like my waistline in comparison, yours is much smaller. And not to say that I don't diet hard, but I think there's been times where I've kind of fallen short as far as like how much conditioning I could be getting or could have gotten in the past. And so it's like, if you were to take your mentality with like, oh, I'm going to just really get shredded and we're going to use Jeff's waist, like how far will we go? Right.
Mm-hmm.
That would be like the elite of the elite right there. Yeah. So I think you kind of have to, like, in order to be a very highly successful bodybuilder, you kind of need both. You need to have like, you do need to have like superior genetics. We're talking like elite level bodybuilding. You do need to have those genetics, but you also need the work ethic. And that's what frustrates me sometimes when people say, I have great genetics. it's almost like I get defensive sometimes. Like, well, wait, I work hard too. It's not just the genetics that's gotten me this far. So for you, it's like, I think you've come a long ways with, and that's the thing too, is like, I think my perspective with successful bodybuilding, because oftentimes we look at people who are obviously superior, right? Like when you see the winners of bodybuilding shows, like they have a combination of everything. Great genetics, great conditioning, great symmetry, solid
Big
posing,
muscle.
like everything is there, the muscle is there. But the way I see it is, if you look at Ronnie Coleman, right? Like obviously probably arguably the best bodybuilder of all time, non-tested and tested side, right? Like that's the GOAT. But that's not to say that he could be better. Like maybe there's some things that he could have done to even get more out of himself. And I look at someone who's maybe not as gifted, but maybe they're working just as hard, if not harder, and they're achieving the same thing Ronnie's achieving, but it just doesn't appear that way. So they're getting the most out of themselves. Like they might be getting 110% out of themselves. It's just we're in a sport it's a visual sport. So you're going to get judged by how you look, but you don't get judged by if you've actually reached your full potential or not. And it's hard to know if you truly have done that or not. So sometimes when you see a guy who come in last place, they may have fulfilled their potential more than the guy that came in first place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because when I got into bodybuilding, I didn't even know that I had a wide waist. I didn't know what symmetry was. I didn't know the difference between having, my 31-inch waist and somebody else's 27-inch waist. I didn't know how that added up on the bodybuilding stage. I just knew that I wanted to be a bodybuilder, and that's all I cared about, And I remember vividly, we were having a discussion, I don't know, it's probably a decade ago. And Jeff, you were getting ready to do an NPC show. I think it was NPC San Francisco or something like that. And I remember you were talking, well, you know what, I can come into this show a little bit less conditioned and kind of lean on my symmetry. I can use my symmetry as kind of the equalizer. And at the time, you might as well have been speaking Chinese to me. I had no idea what you were talking about. I'm like, what does he mean not show up shredded? What does he mean lean on my symmetry a little bit? I didn't know what that meant, because I never had that. First of all, I didn't have that knowledge. And even if I did, I didn't have that ability to lean on that, So when I got into bodybuilding, I got into it just with this mindset of I need to do everything I can to get as conditioned as possible, because that was the only thing I knew. You just got to be shredded. You got to show every single muscle up there. And really, it wasn't until like a decade later that I even knew about symmetry and knew that you could not really do anything about a big, bony, blocky waist. And I remember vividly when in 2008, when I was going to be facing Alberto and how ridiculously wide his back looked, not even knowing that it was his very small waist that made his back look that wide. And I remember thinking, okay, well, you know what? I got to make my waist as small as his, which means I got to diet harder. I didn't know that I was not going to get any smaller than that, which kind of brings this to where I want to go with this is, how do you know that you're going to be good at this bodybuilding thing, right? How do you know that you're even made for bodybuilding? And I think the first thing that I would tell people is kind of look at it with that childlike exuberance that I looked at it in 2003 when I was doing my first bodybuilding show. I just wanted to do it. I didn't care. And I'd seen a lot of my mentors and a lot of folks that I followed do it. And I was like, I want to do that, and I'm ready to do it. And I think, to be honest with you, that is the most important part, is if you really want it, regardless of how hard it is, if you're made for it, if you're going to excel, if you've got, like you said earlier, I got great genetics. don't rely on any of that stuff. Just good old fashioned desire. If you really want to do it, just go at it.
Yeah, I think that's even true if you are blessed with a small waist. But kind of like you, I think when I first started competing, I had no idea like symmetry, conditioning, like how much muscle, because I didn't know what to expect. Doing my first show, I think I thought I was better than what I really was because I was coming from a small local gym. There was no internet back then. So I only knew what I knew. And what I seen in the gym, like, oh, okay, I can keep up with these guys. And then when I went to my first actual competition and just being backstage, it was like, whoa, there is a lot of talent here. Like there's a lot of big guys and they all look great, but I didn't have no knowledge as far as like, okay, we need to make sure the waist, there's like this X taper and all this stuff. Like I wasn't aware of that stuff. Kind of like you, I was just like, I'm training to be as big as I possibly can be. Like that was my mentality in the early days, was just, I just want muscle. I want to get strong and I want to be big. And I had no idea as far as like what level of conditioning. I think even now, like when I coach athletes, like you kind of don't know who you're going to be up against. Like you might have a wider waist, but so you could be a Brad Loomis and just come in really dialed. And you get on stage and there's like 8 other guys up there. Your waist might actually be the smallest one because maybe there's 7 other guys with wide waists.
Okay.
So you might actually have the small waist and the broad shoulders in comparison to them. And then you might do another show where it's the opposite, and someone like you've been on stage where you've had the widest waist on stage and it's like, okay, well now you better get shredded. But you just, in my opinion, it's like, if like, kind of like what you're seeing, if you have a passion for it, like you love bodybuilding, it's something that you actually want to do, whether you're going to be a competitive bodybuilder or just do it because you just want to make yourself better. You starts out with that passion. Like, well, who says you can't do it?
Okay.
Because in the end, it's about maximizing your own potential.
Yeah,
that's what it comes down to.
Exactly. Yeah. And at the time, I mean, I remember I had lifted solidly for, it was a good 6-7 years that I had lifted solidly, and I was pretty strong. I was the strongest guy basically in our town, I mean, granted our town is only about 2,000 people, but
you're still the strongest guy in your town, aren't you?
Not quite. This kid that wears this jersey right here behind me, he's stronger than me now.
Yeah, so don't tell him that though.
Oh no, and he doesn't listen to us, so his head won't get too big. But I just remember thinking at the time, you know what? I need to do something in this sport that's a little bit different. I have not dieted before. I have not, really done this bodybuilding thing before, and I didn't know anybody that did it. And it appealed to me so much that I didn't even care. I was just like, let's just do this. And I mean, yeah, it was really freaking hard. I probably did it like one of the worst ways that you could do it. But I didn't care. It was hard, and I made myself do it because I wanted to really, really bad, and you couldn't have talked me out of it. You could not have talked me out of it. And that's the way I coach people today. If they really, really want to just do this bodybuilding thing, I'm like, you know what? That trumps all. Yes, you could have a little bit more muscle. Yeah, you could probably have a little bit more time spending, a little bit of a cut here and a cut there to see how things go. But if you really, really want to do this, let's just do it.
Some people don't do it because they let fear, like the fear of the unknown, the insecurities. Like, am I going to be big enough? Am I going to be symmetrical enough? All these things. How am I going to stack up? Like they let that get in their way, and then 5 years go by and they're still in the same place. I need to be a little bigger, or I need to have symmetry. But it's like sometimes you just got to get in there and do it. Just do the damn thing. Put the work in, because whether you're successful or not externally, meaning the placings, that's how you know where you kind of fit. And it's kind of like when I headed into my first world championship, the Orton Cup. Like in the back of my mind, I was like, it'd be nice to get a top 5, but I didn't really know for sure if I was even good enough to even be considered for that, because I'd never been on a world stage before, never been exposed to the elite level natural bodybuilders out there. So there was a lot of unknowns there, but like, I guess I'm going to find out, and I'm going to put everything I have into this and see what happens. Well, I got 7th out of 11, so I was more of a bottom dweller, but I learned so much from that experience. Like, I learned, like, okay, I shouldn't be flexing the entire way through. Like, when I'm behind, like when they put you to the back.
Yeah.
Like, I'm flexing, trying to stay flexed, like, because they say, hey, you should always be ready. They're looking at you all the time. Like, well, I consumed so much energy doing that. Like, when I got back out there to pose, I could barely hold my poses. So that was a learning experience. And then being next to some of those more elite level natural bodybuilders, I learned, like, oh wow, they're crushing me on my shoulders, they're crushing me on my back, my conditioning. I'm about 2 or 3 pounds away from being to the conditioning I need to be. So there's just all these things I learned just by going through that experience. But if I'd never exposed myself to that, I would never have learned, and I never would have improved thereafter. And that's the thing, is even though there's other guys that are crushing me, those guys helped me to make myself better. And flash forward 3 years later, I go to the WBF Worlds, and Cleveland Thomas, who smashed me at the Orton Cup 3 years prior, I got a chance to stand next to him. Well, I got a chance to stand next to him again in 2014, and he crushed me again. But at least it wasn't as bad as the first time. Like, I made some improvements to the shoulders. I made some improvements to my back. My conditioning was a little bit better. And externally, I was rewarded, thankfully, because the lineup was different. I got a 4th. But even through a loss, it helped me to be better. Like, it helped me to reach more of my potential. And so I think sometimes, like, when we're starting out, like if we're just wanting to start a prep, we put too much of an emphasis on the external side of it. Like, what placing am I going to get? How are people going to perceive me? And things like that. When it's about, again, I'm going to stress it probably throughout the whole podcast, is fulfilling your own potential. Like, you're your own canvas, and you're the most important judge, because you have a panel of 6, 7, 5 judges, whatever it is. It's just an opinion, and it's based off of other bodybuilders that are there on that particular day. So it's just like, for me, it's like it's important that I stress with people who are thinking about doing this, like, just do it. Like, what's the worst can happen? You're going to end up learning more than you would if you're just sitting on your butt.
Yeah. And like you talked about earlier, Jeff, if I would have worried about my wide waist had I known about it, if I would have worried about how I was going to stack up against bodybuilders when I didn't know who was going to show up. There was no internet there, If I would have been worried about all that stuff, I might never have gotten on the bodybuilding stage, because like you said, I'm not ready yet. I got to get wider shoulders. I'm not ready yet. I got to get wider lats. I got to have better V taper. I got to do something to combat this waist. Had I known all that stuff, I may have never even got up there. And fast forward, I probably wouldn't have met you guys. I wouldn't have been part of the muscle journey. Because
so what was your expectations like when you said, okay, I'm going to do this thing? Like, what was your expectations?
I remember vividly, and I'll be honest with you, I remember vividly thinking, okay, I have to win this thing, because at the time I had just started Healthy Bodies Fitness here in the little town, and I was like, I need to win this thing because I need to have the exposure in order to make my business successful. I was kind of like my own advertising in a way, But secondarily to that, and this is going to be kind of something that we're going to fast forward to Brad's 2024 prep, the way that I was going to win was to get absolutely shredded. Because again, I didn't know about symmetry. I didn't know that I had this huge, wide blocking waist.
How did you know to get shredded though? Like, where was that coming from? Did you look at other local shows or?
Well, and just my mentors. I mean, arguably at the time, the most shredded natural bodybuilder that was out there was Skip LaCour.
Yeah.
And he was my coach and he was my mentor, and I didn't talk to him a whole lot like, we communicate with our athletes. But I got to talk to him about 2 or 3 times, and I was like, I need to get as shredded as possible. That was my mindset. Yeah. And then, of course, when I showed up, it wasn't a real big show. I won my novice class best out of, I think, 3 or something like that. And then I won the novice overall, and then I competed in the open. And I want to say that I was second, in the open or something like that. But nonetheless, I did really, really well. And it propelled me to want to do it again and to want to do it more, and yeah, I mean, it would have never happened had I been worried about my structure, and how much muscle I had and all that kind of good stuff. I just really, really wanted to do it. And, that kind of is a nice segue, I feel like, getting off of the structure topic, right? Because hopefully we've just kind of alluded that is like a small part of bodybuilding, because I mean, really, honestly, do we even have to get on the bodybuilding stage to be a bodybuilder? And I would argue that there's many, many bodybuilders that are out there that have never even competed on a bodybuilding stage. Because it really is more so the person that's inside of the bones and the skin and et cetera, that is what makes the bodybuilder. And at this point here, I almost kind of feel like we have to talk about how do I say this appropriately? I want to make sure I choose my words wisely. Our path, natural bodybuilding, right? And then you kind of look at the opposite of natural bodybuilding, right? Choosing to use pharmaceuticals and things like that. Because I feel like our path, you have to be so patient and so willing to put in months and years of work. We have a great little Instagram square that just basically it's to give it a summary. It's like, natural bodybuilding is not something where you can make an adjustment and then see if it worked in about 2 weeks later. Yeah. It doesn't work that way. And with natural bodybuilding, you make an adjustment, you better be ready to commit to that adjustment and run it for months, maybe even a year, to find out if it worked. And so I feel like one of the many attributes that kind of gives you an idea is if you're made for bodybuilding is, you better not have too much of an attention deficit. You know what I mean? You better be patient enough to make a protocol, stick to it, and run the thing and rinse and repeat over and over and over again. Not to say that you can't adjust and you can't periodize and things like that, but you have to go after it and commit.
Right. I got a good story for Leo Silva, my athlete from Brazil, just got his pro card. Well, at the 22 Muscle Mayhem, he took second in the overall to Alberto's athlete, Brian. And after that show, it was said, okay, we got to have a game plan so the next time you compete, you're more in contention for that pro card. So at my house after the show, like literally a day or two after, we wrote his program for the off season, his training program. He stuck to the exact program for 2 years. 2 straight years. Did not deviate at all. There was a couple of small exercise changes here and there, but the gist of the program, the big picture, did not change anything. Volume, everything stayed the same. And he focused on performance. And you've seen how much size he put on and
in the off season. The difference in his physique, period, not just the size. And this is
more of an advanced bodybuilder. And he got his pro card this year, and we're getting ready for Worlds now. And I feel like he has a shot at top 5, not to put pressure on him, but he's improved a lot because he was, like you said, he was committed and he was patient. He wasn't like, okay, I'm going to change things every week or every other week or every month. It's like, no, I'm going to stay committed to this game plan. And so I mean, I have a good testament too. I've been training for 38 years. I'm not, getting impatient and wanting to change things constantly because I know it's a process. It's an evolution. And I think those things are like just the mentality and the emotional makeup of a bodybuilder is what kind of make up a lot of ground as far as being a successful bodybuilder.
And with that patience, you have to just kind of know that, I mean, even with the dramatic improvements that Leo made, it was 2 years. I'm sure most people, myself included, might look at it after 6 months and say, oh, this isn't working. And maybe I start periodizing to the next thing or whatever.
And it wasn't, hey, 3 months, hey, it's been 3 months, I'm going to go into a mini cut now. Mini cut for 3 months. Now I'm going to go back into a gaining phase. No, he stayed committed to, hey, let's get your body weight up to a place where it's conducive towards high performance and good recovery, and just stay there and train. And that's exactly what it did. And I'll be honest, it's kind of boring, right? Like, people watch my Instagram or whatever, like, okay, there's Jeff, he's doing the same thing again, over and over and over again. It's like, there's nothing exciting to my Instagram. You can go back 10 years on that thing. You're like, okay, the movement patterns are similar. The posts are very similar, but yet I'll get the questions, how are you so jacked at 52? How are you so jacked at 53? How'd you get top 5 at Worlds at 52? But you go back 10 years on the Instagram, like, because I started on Instagram in 2014, the posts are consistent, just like my training is. The only thing is inconsistent is my diet, because I'll be honest, in the off season, I like to eat sometimes. But the training, for the most part, very consistent all the way through. And of course, you learn things here and there, you make some subtle changes. But for the most part, I understand that it's that old saying, right? It's a marathon, not a sprint. And you have to develop that patience. Because if you're changing things constantly, and then it's hard to identify like what's working, what isn't working. So it's just keeping people committed and engaged to a consistent process. And it's easier said than done sometimes.
Hey again, 3DMJers. This is Andrea Valdez popping in for our annual mid-year, mid-bodybuilding season call for athletes who want to compete next season in 2025. Every year, without fail, we get people who contact us in January looking to compete sometime in the next 3 to 6 months. And like 99% of the time, we have to turn them away, or we have to convince them that they need to wait another year before stepping on stage as a 3DMJ athlete. This is because a competitive natural bodybuilding season cannot be a rush job. There's a long-term strategy and process to make every contest prep pay off, and we're in the business of building athletic careers. We are not in the business of crash diets, quick transformations, or creating disordered eating behaviors. It's our mission to provide our athletes with the best possible chance of success, and to do that, we have time-intensive systems. Once you submit an application, it'll likely take 2 to 6 weeks to have your initial protocol set up with your 3DMJ coach. They'll likely run you through an initial block or 2 of baseline training and nutrition to build a relationship and learn your body. And next, depending on your experience and context, you'll likely have a contest prep positioning phase or a diet before the diet to run for like 1 to 3 months. Then there'll be a small maintenance phase as well before the actual contest prep home stretch finally initiates. So in short, we don't do 12-week rapid transformations. We build educated athletes for the long haul, and that takes time. All that's to say, if you're looking to compete in 2025, you need to hop on our rosters as soon as possible. To do that, go to 3dmusclejourney.com/coaching. There you'll find a summary of our procedures and pricings and FAQ sections to help you learn more about what to expect. Again, that's 3dmusclejourney.com/coaching to check it out and get to our info page and get yourself signed up. Thank you so much for listening, and enjoy the rest of the show.
I find it a very common trait. A lot of the bodybuilders, and not just males, I remember it probably sounds like we're talking about males here, but it's also females. They're kind of boring people when you get to know them. They don't really need a whole lot.
Oh, I'm not going to say that to my wife, Brad. No way.
But they've had the same job, for a long time, or they kind of like to just stay at home and do their thing. And they just, I don't know how else to say it in a more polite way, but they're not real flamboyant, extravagant people that have these, really flamboyant lifestyles, and they just rinse and repeat things just over and over and over again. And ironically, I mean, look at some of the skills that it takes to do things that are really, really hard, right? Like some of my both female and male athletes that do really well in bodybuilding, they're gymnasts. And I mean, these people have to do rep after rep after rep after rep of the same thing over and over again.
Practice.
Exactly. And you can just kind of see that these people are okay with doing the same thing over and over and over again, knowing it's going to pay off come meet day, show day, kind of whatever. But it kind of just reinforces that you have to be committed and be ready to just be disciplined to work your craft over and over and over again, and be patient with the process.
That's like me for like when I look at training now. Like I didn't look at training this way when I was in my 20s or 30s, like from a skill component. Like obviously as a gymnast, I'm not a gymnast, but I mean, obviously there's a shit ton of skill there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if they're, imagine them changing everything constantly. That's like, how are you really going to hone in on that?
Exactly.
So it's the same thing now. Like I'm a far better bodybuilder in my 50s because of the skill level in my training. Like I wish I could go back. And I mean this from a mental perspective. So like physically, maybe not, I don't know. But I think from a mental perspective, in my 50s, I'm far superior than I was in my 20s, 30s, and even into my 40s. I wish I can take the mentality I have now and shift it back into my 20-year-old body.
Yep.
And just hone in on the skill. Because when you watch my form of technique, it's almost like, a gymnast. Like you got to like, okay, I'm trying to get a perfect 10. That's a goal of a gymnast, right, Andrew? I know you're behind the scenes. Give me a thumbs. Yep, give me a thumbs up. Is to get a perfect 10. So when I'm doing like, if it's a squat, leg press, whatever it is, I want to make that a perfect 10. So you have to, that mentality needs to, be a patient one. Like, let me hone in on a skill before, like increasing loads. Like I have this now philosophy, like I'm not going to increase my loads until I've mastered the one load for at least 3 sessions, sometimes more. Like I want to make sure I'm hitting the high end of the rep range with that load and it's flawless. And if I feel like, hey, I'm close to that perfect 10, then I'm going to move the load up. And I'm going to move it up with confidence, because now I know when I move the load up, I'm going to be able to maintain a high degree of skill with it. Maybe it's not a perfect 10 now. Maybe it's more like a 5 or a 9 or whatever. But then now, okay, in the next few sessions, we're going to get that up to a 10 again. And it's really just helped me to like be a lot more calm too within the process.
Okay.
So just slowing down that approach to training has helped me out quite a bit. And of course, a lot of this has to do with the fact that I'm aging and my joints don't feel as springy as they once did. So it's almost like a protective measure that it's in place. But again, I wish I would have like adopted this mentality in my 20s, this approach in my 20s, because I think it would have got me a lot further, a lot sooner.
And that's kind of what has me excited about not only how I did this prep, but then also next year, because I'm a late bloomer, right? I see Jeff and I see what he's doing, and I hear him talking about skill and the skill component that's involved with it, and staying composed, and et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of my Instagram posts and the YouTube blogs that I've done as of late, there's a lot of comments that's, hey, I can see that Jeff's kind of rubbing off on you. You're more patient with your reps. You're more controlled. You're more disciplined with keeping that eye on making it a perfect 10, right? And I really feel like that strategy and really, like we just talked about, like really grasping it and embracing it and working it all the way through my last off season and then all the way through this prep, I felt like it really helped this year, the 2024 version of Brad at 52 years old, to hold on to my muscle during the whole prep. And it's got me excited about next year, because it's like a new thing to me. It's kind of like I'm hoping and embracing that this is something that is fairly new to Brad, who's lifted for like 30 years, that I've never done before. And I'm committed to the process, and I'm just going to do the same thing over and over and over again. Just working on that control and that skill component. And like you said, Jeff, making sure that I've mastered this movement with this load and got a perfect 10, like a few weeks in a row, and then coming up with the load a little bit.
Yeah,
and it's made it a little bit more fun because now I can focus a little bit more on the performance aspect of it, as opposed to just the abstract pump and getting as many reps in as I can, regardless of tempo and what it's taking to get those reps. You know, it's like actual true performance, set by set, week by week, month by month, block by block, etc.
Because I even, like, within a rep, I even think, like, okay, it's performance based, everything. Like, okay, yes, because oftentimes we look at performance, we're looking at how much load can we lift or how many reps can we do.
Like
I think of, like, okay, how well can I move that with that load, with those reps? The concentric, what's the speed like? Is it a little bit faster than last time? Is it under more control? Am I shaking? Is my stability there? Like, are my feet moving when I'm pressing those dumbbells, or is my energy, there's no energy leakage at all?
Yeah.
Things like that. Like, even like with the concentric, did I control, or the eccentrics rather, did I control it all the way down?
Yep.
In the grinder reps, am I struggling, straining, or am I in complete control of it? So there's a lot going on within a single rep that I think about and I take mental notes on. I think too, like, this philosophy and approach, like, just, it's more of a patient and control type philosophy, and the skill, like, that applies not just with training, but also with dieting, like as a bodybuilder. Like, because let's go back to our old days, Brad, where it's like, you wanted to get shredded, but you talked about it in the podcast many times, like, your pace was just way too assertive, too aggressive. Because you're eager, because you're like, okay, I'm going to try to be the best that I can be. So you're losing weight too quickly. So you're probably eating up some tissue. I did the same exact thing in my first prep. I lost 30 pounds in 6 weeks. Yeah, I know, it's pretty nutty, but wasn't the right thing to do, but it taught me, like, okay, I know how to grind. And I was excited to do it, which is crazy now. But through the years I've evolved, like, I've realized, like, it's not so much a hardcore, like, fast paced approach, but I think Berto's talked about this too. It's like, it's more about picking your spots, and, you know, like a good boxer would, you know, like a wild Mike Tyson versus an Evander Holyfield who, like, okay, let me stay on the outside. I'm going to jab you. You rush in and I'm going to pop you. And that's exactly what happened. So it was more of a patient, controlled approach. So when I look at other sports more so than I look at bodybuilders to learn these things, I'm like, okay, how can I apply that to my bodybuilding? Well, through the dieting, it's like, okay, instead of losing 2 pounds a week, okay, let me drop that down to 1 pound. Then you're like, oh, okay, now I don't feel as hungry. I don't feel as tired. My training is feeling a lot better. I can perform better. The recovery is better. I'm holding on to more muscle fullness. And even then, I take it a step further, like, well, what would happen if I lost a 0.5 pound instead of a full pound? So let me extend the dieting out longer. And remember, Brad, in 2011 when I dieted for 47 weeks? And everybody's like, oh, I got bashed for that, remember?
Yeah, I do.
Oh my gosh. Remember everybody's saying, don't tell people that you're dieting that long. Well, all that they saw was 47 weeks. They felt like that's suffering. But when you lose a 0.5 pound versus 2 pounds, like, that is not suffering. You're not feeling it as much. So I learned to, like, slow pace down, pick my spots, when to push hard, when to pull back. And I think as far as, like, you know, being, again, a successful bodybuilder, you know, regardless of your genetics, like, these are the things that are going to really maximize your full potential. And again, it's learning skills in all these areas.
Well, in that 47 weeks, you learned a lot during that 47 weeks. I remember as we were kind of dissecting that thing when it was all said and done, you know, and even you were like, yeah, I probably didn't need to have refeeds that were quite that big. I need to have them. Yeah, but I need to kind of pick my shots a little bit.
I was pushing
better.
boundaries. I was like, okay, I had a 500 carb refeed. Okay, I filled out, still lost weight the following week. Like, hey, well, what happened if I had 600 grams of carbs? And then I was pushing those things up to 1,000 grams of carbs, and all it was doing was getting me bloated and feeling uncomfortable. But I was still losing weight after that. Yeah. And then I learned, well, instead of having 1,000 carb refeeds, why don't I just spread some of that through the week?
Yeah, because that's when we started learning about double refeeds and how it affects not only the how you look, but then how that kind of spills over into how you feel when you kind of start dieting again. That was really a good experiment in just diet breaks and structuring diet breaks in a smart way, you know. Which is, you know, that's kind of one thing that I wanted to kind of take this to is you have to be very open-minded and you have to be willing to learn, but at the same time, you have to have a good filter. You know, you have to know, okay, that applies to me and that doesn't. And that might apply to me, but I'm not doing it now, you know?
How do you know?
Yeah, exactly. How do you know how
do you know is you actually got to get in the trenches and actually explore, right? Now,
well,
if I would have known, like, okay, do the 1,000 carb refeed, like, I know I don't need it. And why? Because I actually explored it for myself. Cardio too. Remember, I got bashed for that prep too, because I was doing 2 cardio sessions a day. I was doing, not every day, I would say probably 3 to 4 days out of the week. There were stints in my prep where I was doing 60 minutes in the morning, less cardio on my recumbent, and I do another 60 in the late afternoons, early evenings. And everybody's like, oh my gosh, like I did enough miles to go from San Francisco to New York that prep. Like literally went across the country.
And yeah, because you had some sort of a milestone you were trying for, if I recall correctly. I can't remember if it was miles or hours, but I do remember that. There was some sort of a milestone that you were striving for to
50 miles.
To kind of make that happen.
50 miles.
Is that what it was?
Yeah. I was like, I want to ride 50 miles. It took me 2 hours and 52 minutes on my recumbent bike.
Wow.
And you know, I think it was Eric, like, why are you doing that? Like, because I was bored. I'm like, I need a challenge. I want to do something different. But I was probably the most conditioned I've ever been up to that point. I'm like, and people are saying you're doing way too much cardio, because it was almost in a sense like it was HIIT cardio was probably more popular at the time. So you're just doing way too much cardio. You're going to lose muscle or whatever. I'm like, look at my physique. It's telling the story, and not to mention, like, my heart rate was like 42 or whatever it was. Like, I feel like more like an athlete. Like, I feel like an endurance athlete and a physique athlete at the same time. And I felt like I was in great shape. But now, like, you see like someone like Sam Okonola, who's prepping for bodybuilding shows and doing marathons. And that's acceptable now, whereas back in 2011, it wasn't acceptable by a lot of people anyways. So like you said, you have to be open-minded. You have to be willing to, like, actually explore and not be afraid if you fail, because as long as you don't get hurt, obviously. But if you fail, you learn, as long as you're staying open-minded to learning.
Yeah, and still have that filter there, because I'm sure that, you know, all the other variables with you were in place, even though you were doing the cardio thing and the big refeeds. The training stayed in place. You know, the other aspects stayed in place. It wasn't like you kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater. You were able to filter through what it was that you needed to apply and what you needed to explore, and what you didn't need to.
Because I'm like, okay, if I'm going to do all this cardio, I'm going to do it first thing in the morning, away from my training, and then I'm going to do it post-training. So I wasn't doing it in a way where it was going to negatively impact the weight training performance. So you do have to have some critical thinking skills if you're not sure. But even then, let's say I did do the cardio right for the training, like, it probably wouldn't take me long to figure out, like, you know, a couple weeks into it, like, all of a sudden my leg press went from like 400 pounds, now it's down to 200. Like, it's probably because obviously the cardio is right in front of it.
Yeah, you touched on another kind of an important point there. It was kind of fun for you to do that cardio at the time. It served basically 2 purposes. You needed to expend energy. You didn't need to worry about, at the time, you know, your heart rate and all that cardiovascular health, but you needed to expend calories.
Yeah.
And you found a kind of a fun way, you know, to do it.
I think too, like sometimes we don't think about, because sometimes we think about the science, we should or shouldn't be doing things, you know, the science, or maybe someone else is telling us how we should be doing something. But at the time, I was going through divorce. And that was a struggle in my life at that point, a low point. So it's like, to occupy my mind, to occupy myself on something that's purposeful and a positive, like, that was another reason why I'm going to get on the bike and ride for an hour. It was kind of an escape from like a darker time. So there's like something we look at people's context. Like sometimes, you know, you have to do things that maybe are a little unorthodox if it's helping other areas outside of bodybuilding. So that's why we have to look at everybody's context. It's very unique sometimes, and sometimes it might seem a little crazy, but it may not be really crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, you were open-minded enough to know I need to do this. And this is a tool that I've got, and it's serving more than one purpose, you know? Because I kind of feel like that's very. Remember when we were doing a lot of powerlifting with our clients in the off season, because they would lose their motivation and they would not, you know, they wouldn't be training, you know, when it was kind of like the most important part of the off season was to keep that training intact. You know, we were kind of using powerlifting is kind of like you were using that cardio. You know, we need to train. That's kind of something we should probably touch on. If if you want to know you're made for bodybuilding, you better like lifting weights, right?
That would help.
Yeah. But remember, that was kind of one of the things that helped keep a lot of those off-season bodybuilders motivated. Was let's give them something to keep the mandatory part of bodybuilding in place, and that is lifting weights. But we kind of shift the motivations a little bit. We shift the strategy behind things a little bit.
Sometimes just added a little spark to some people.
It kept it a little fun. Yeah.
Because personally speaking, like I've never been I didn't have a passion for powerlifting. Passion for bodybuilding. For someone like me, it didn't matter. Like if you told me, hey Jeff, I need you to do these powerlifting things to stay, I would probably be like, no, I'll just stick to the bodybuilding. But there's a lot of people that once the season's over with, they kind of just lose that interest. The energy dies down because the hyper focus is gone. So it's like, okay, hey, let's get your bench to 300 now. You know, so it keeps, like you said, just keeps going, things going in the right direction with that.
Yeah, and I think just having a good amount of self-awareness, you know, it's like I need to do something to make this fun again. And like you said, Jeff, know the context of who you are as a person and what it is that you're going through so that you can kind of make it something that's a little bit more enjoyable to you. Because that's one thing that got me through a 10-year off season, right? Is I was still lifting every single week, 52 weeks a year for 10 years, is I was able to know who I was and make things fun for me, so that I would, stick with it all of the time, What is that? 520 weeks or something like that.
Yeah, with your training, like you say, you know who you are. Like, how do you know who you are with your training? Because oftentimes people will start training and it's like there's no interest in competing. And then maybe someone says, hey, you have what it takes to maybe compete, whether it's a physical or a mental or whatever. Like, how would you truly know if you should or shouldn't compete? Like, do you, like, as far as your, like, what's the for me, it's like, what's the purpose of your training? Like, what's the current purpose? Why are you even lifting weights in the first place? I think that's an important question to kind of answer for each person.
Listen, yeah, and it's going to be different for everybody, right?
But like I was
kind of alluding to earlier, how many bodybuilders are out there that are probably like true bodybuilders that have never stepped on a bodybuilding stage, because they are all of those things that we mentioned. They're patient, they've found a way to make their training fun. Something we need to touch on is that they can freaking grind, they can make things hard, and continuously keep to it, even though things are hard, right? Because let's face it, it doesn't even really matter if we're talking about a hard set, continuously making things kind of burn and making things kind of hurt. But then also just the flip side of that, right? Sometimes you got to be willing to, and this is kind of obvious, right? You got to be willing to starve. You got to be willing to be low on energy. You got to willing to be disciplined in order to get into bodybuilding condition. But then there's also that flip side of it. You know, how many times have we lost sight of bodybuilding in order to keep the shreds? You know, we've worked so hard for this body, and we want to kind of hold on to it. We want to kind of, you know, stay, you know, in this body for a little while. And then lost sight that, you know, you are a bodybuilder, you know, and we need to get out of this state, and not totally, you know, become fat, you know, obviously, but we kind of need to go the other direction and kind of be okay with losing the shreds. Maybe even at some point, depending on where you're at in your career, maybe even be a little bit fluffy while you're keeping your training in place. You got to be willing to kind of do those hard things,
but technically,
to really excel.
You're more of a bodybuilder in that state than you are when you're dieting down for a show.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Because that's when you're actually in an environment to actually build muscle. So that's true bodybuilding, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because, I mean, that's one of the things that I really, really drove home in, I don't even remember, it was probably at least 8 years ago. Being comfortable with being uncomfortable doesn't just have to do with dieting, you know. You got to be willing to get into a state that maybe you're visually you're not really comfortable with, but that is where you need to kind of stay and make that training environment happen. Again, rolling back into patience, rolling back into being committed to the process. How many times do people say, oh, I made my goal weight, I bulked up to 210, 215, 220 pounds, now let's start cutting? It's like, you know what, let's stay the course. We don't need to necessarily get heavier.
Yeah.
But we need to stay here and we need to train.
I think a good word is acceptance. Because sometimes
acceptance of the phase that you're in.
Because like you said, because sometimes visibly, if we're not looking the way we want to look, or maybe you're a little too soft, but it's where you're going to perform at your best, where you know that's where the magic is going to happen as far as putting on some more muscle. It's hard to accept hanging out there, though. Like, even I struggle with that sometimes. Like, sometimes, like, oof, a little soft here. I wish I didn't look like that. I want to cut some of this off. But then I know if I do that, it's a little bit of a sacrifice, because now it's like I have to sacrifice family a little bit. Maybe it's social settings. I have to sacrifice that. And that can be a challenge. And I think sometimes too, if you're here, you might have come across some of your athletes, or maybe an athlete like this that really wanted to compete, but they weren't sure because their family dynamic or the work dynamic was just probably a little too stressful for them. And you kind of know, like, okay, if we put this person in a prep, it's probably not going to go too well. Because we talked about earlier, like, yeah, you just got to get in there and do it. You got to just go in there and learn and just go after it. But sometimes I think if the family dynamic or the work dynamic is, maybe there's just far too many constraints there. Like, obviously going into a contest prep would be probably adding more fuel to the fire. So maybe it's not the time to do those types of things. But I think from that perspective too, like, under those circumstances, maybe you're not cut out to be a competitive bodybuilder in that moment, but it doesn't mean you're not a bodybuilder. Yeah. Because everybody can have their own definition of bodybuilding. Some people, like, they're really good bodybuilders on social media. Right? They got millions of followers, but they never stepped on a stage. They're really good at what they do, right? Pretty good physiques. They speak well. They put out great content, and they got a lot of following. Like, to them, like, okay, I'm highly successful. Whereas a competitive bodybuilder who maybe doesn't have a following will look at that and go, they're not really bodybuilders. I'm like, well, yeah, actually they are. In their own way, they're their own bodybuilder, and they're good at what they do. So each person can have their own definition of bodybuilding. Like, right now, I'm an off-season bodybuilder. You know, I'm 15, 17, 18% body fat, well-fueled. My training's going well. I'm recovering well. I'm enjoying my training. Visibly, I'm just not 100% happy with how I look in the off-season, but I know it's conducive to good training, good recovery, and I could function well as far as the family dynamic and all that. And you know, when the time does come to shift gears to be a competitive bodybuilder, well, now my definition has just changed, and the approach will somewhat change.
That whole dissertation that you just gave out, Jeff, it reminded me of what I feel like
that's a big word. No one's ever said that to me.
I don't even think I said it
word.
right, because I think dissertation is actually something that you write. But anyway, I want to say that arguably the best bodybuilder that I ever met, and Jeff, you probably barely remember him, but there was a guy that used to train at my gym that did the Billy Funk Memorial way back in the day. He was an older guy. I didn't even know he existed, but he just lived right down the road from me. And very strong. I mean, if I remember right, that guy was like 50 and he benched like 330 with a pause, and just a really strong guy. But at the same time, like he would train his friends there in the gym. And I mean, you want to talk about knowing bodybuilding. Like he would go through these phases. He was a power lifter, don't get me wrong, but he would like, you know what I need to do? I need to work this body part. And, he would individualize training certain muscles and certain body parts, you know what I mean? And he said, that's what bodybuilding is. I got to bring that muscle up in order to help that lift, He knew, I don't even, if it was his education, but he kind of knew how to use bodybuilding and that he was a bodybuilder. And he was really able to instill that into a lot of the people that he, that he helped out for free, he just kind of trained them, and, he would I mean, that guy had zero following, you know what I mean? He lived in this tiny little town. It was him and his wife, and he showed up to this meet, it seemed like he kicked everybody's butt except for like one, that, in my opinion, was like one of the best bodybuilders that I had ever seen. And again, this was a guy that was patient. He was kind of boring. He was, super willing to just do the same thing over and over again. And arguably, now that I think about it, that was probably one of the best bodybuilders I'd ever met in my life.
Yeah. It's the boring stuff, right? Like even podcast, like I had a comment on I don't know if it was our podcast, I can't recall, or someone else's, where one of the comments said I was saying the same thing over again. Like they heard it before. And I'm like, yeah, because there's a lot of people that need to hear what I just said, and sometimes it needs to be repeated, because again, it's the boring, consistent things done over and over where that skill acquisition gets better and better and better. And when you hear the 5-year shelf life, right, as far as our gains and progress, it's like, glad I didn't listen to that, because I mean, here I am in my early 50s, and Marshall Johnson, who just at 64, just took second at the OCB President's Cup, and there was 21 bodybuilders there. And here's this 64-year-old taking second place to guys half his age. So he's a testament of what boring stuff done over and over and over again with patience and with high degree of skill, what you can actually do. But yeah, to me, I see bodybuilding, it's like, I look at it more from an art lens now than I do a sport lens or a competitive lens. In my early 20s, this is defining body. There's different ways to define bodybuilding and bodybuilders. I think for me in my 20s, it was more about the external stuff. Got to win shows, those that get notoriety. Same thing in my 30s, it was like, okay, I'm chasing pro card now, because I didn't know about pro cards when I was in my 20s. In my 30s, like I get this pro card thing. And then in my 40s, I was like, okay, let me have fun now. Like things started to shift. The purpose, like I want to have fun and enjoy the actual journey. And then again, it kind of turned back into some competitiveness. And now that I'm in my 50s, it's like a whole different definition of bodybuilding for me. It's more artistic now. It's like, what can I do with this 53-year-old physique? Can I improve it? Can I get it bigger? Can I make it look like the guy you're talking about? Can I bring up this body part? Can I get a little more condition? Can I pose better? And it's more as a purpose to reach my current potential, which may or may not be better than I was in the past. So I try to frame it as like, what can I do in the moment to make myself the best bodybuilder I can, regardless of what placings I get or the notoriety I get, because at the end of the day, the placings and all that fades to black. Like no one knows any of, like no one's going to remember the titles I won in the 90s, the 2000s or whatever. Like eventually the top 5 I got last year, no one's going to remember that stuff. It's going to fade out. But what I will remember is like, did I reach my potential? every single time. You know deep down if you did or didn't. Because everybody's always asking, like, how much muscle can you put on? Like, that's a question I still get from people. Like, I don't know. Like, I'm not done yet. Let's find out. And same thing with you, Brad. Like, we don't know if you've reached your full potential or not yet.
Yeah. And you know, one thing I can say, Jeff, is that, again, I'm excited about where I'm at right now. You know, at 52 years old, and arguably I'm not even a pro anymore. You know, I mean, this last competition that I did, I didn't compete as a pro. It's been a decade since I competed as a pro, and I really don't care. You know, and I should probably take the WNBF natural bodybuilder thing off of my Instagram, right?
No, because
I'm a retired pro.
You earned, like, in that era, I earned that title.
Yeah.
And I don't think you should just say, okay, I'm not a pro anymore. Because you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now,
yeah.
So here's the thing. When you competed as a pro, that's where you kind of learned about your genetics, right? Where it really...
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Okay, so here's a question for you. Because it seems like you've rediscovered yourself.
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
So talk about what the mindset is different since it was 2000, what year was it? 2011 when you kind of figured like, okay, we're not placing high anymore on the pro level. So talk about that mindset from there to where you're at now, which is now 13 years later.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a perfect segue, Jeff, because that's kind of where I wanted to go with this. And a lot of this has been listening to you and your approach as far as placings go and things like that. When I kind of figured out 2011, 2014, that especially on the pro stage, there was not going to be any of these high placings anymore. That was one of the things that kind of kept me away from bodybuilding for so long. But this prep here, fast forward to 2024, and I don't want to talk about myself too terrible long, but I still to this day right now am shocked at what you and I managed to accomplish. I really am. And I really truly believe that things were different, you know, that my body looked different, obviously. And like one of the things I feel like is my arms looked smaller, but at the same time, I was a much better bodybuilder, complete bodybuilder. And I really truly feel like that was the best bodybuilder I ever presented on stage. Because yeah, I mean, yes, it was in the different, but in the past, it was kind of like, well, you know what? Conditioning was close, but posing was off, you know? And then on another one, well, you know what? Size was there, that you looked bigger than ever, but conditioning was slightly off, you know? And this year, I really didn't have any expectations as far as like what my conditioning was going to be like, you know, et cetera. I just basically went after this as a love for training, and B, just a love for the process. And I totally just dumped the thought of placing. And it really started, to be honest with you, with the powerlifting meet. And this is kind of like the flip side of placing. I had to let go of what I knew that I could do, and that I knew what my potential was, because I was not at my best. My shoulder was bugging me. I couldn't bench what I could normally bench. I'm a little bit weaker at 52 than I was when I last competed. So my deadlift was not quite as strong, and my squat was not quite as strong. But at the same time, I was like, you know what? Let that go, because the way that these numbers are laying out that I'm seeing here, I have a good potential to win, or at least be top 3 in podium. And I totally just let go of what I felt that I could do as far as like previous versions of Brad, and just basically did my training. I did my training, I stuck to it, and I had to show up on that day to compete, right? And so I could not hurt myself, and et cetera, et cetera. And I showed up on that day, and as the numbers laid out, I competed really, really well. But I took that piece toward my bodybuilding prep, and I tossed out all the placing. I'm like, you know what? Let's be smart about our training. And number one, let's just try hard. And Jeff, there was a lot of times when I didn't want to practice my posing. And there was a lot of times getting ready in 2014, I didn't practice my posing. But it was kind of like, Brad, let's just try. Let's just try, you know, in 5 minutes. Just prop up the camera, put the curtain across the back. Let's just practice your posing for 5 minutes. Practice your routine, you know. When it came to the dieting, you know, it was kind of like, I didn't really care about what foods I was eating. I needed to hit 250 grams of carbs. Oh, look, there's bagels. I really loved the process that went along with that. I mean, you told me get 10,000 steps a day. It's like, oh man, I didn't think about how hard it was going to be. I just made it happen. And this was, I feel like, the funnest prep that I've ever done. And you know what? It was hard for like 3 weeks. It was really hard for like 3 weeks.
Do you think this is the fact that you let go of the pressures of the
exactly
the external pressures of trying to appease, I don't know, some arbitrary judges or
me,
or social media or whatever,
or whatever
even
my
yourself?
expectations
yeah, exactly.
were.
You're just saying, let me just let it all hang out. Whatever happens, happens, and I'm gonna try to have fun doing it.
Yep. And when it was time to make it hard, I knew that when you told me I need to track everything, I need to track my iceberg lettuce and track my carrots and hit 1,700 calories, I knew that was going to be hard, but I was ready for it and I wanted it. You know what I mean? And I just needed to try. And was I perfect? No. There was days. I think you actually told me to hit 1,600 calories, but it was always like 1,670.
No, you had prep brain. I told you 1,700.
Okay, well, there you go. But nonetheless, I just enjoyed it. I really enjoyed that whole process. And guess what? I did good on the masters. Okay, that's fine. Take that for what it's worth. I got 5th out of 6 in the open. I didn't care.
I know you seem like when you're up there, you seemed at peace. Like you seem like you're actually free. Yeah. And enjoying it. Like it's probably the most calm I've ever seen you hit poses too with skill, right? Skill acquisition. So even if it's 5-10 minutes a day done over and over and over again, you pick it up, you get better at it. I remember like in 2014 when I peaked for the Pro International, the night before the show, I was so relaxed. I was so free. Like, cause that whole week I just played it in my head. The judges, it doesn't matter.
That's it.
Like, it doesn't matter. It's subjective. And all that I'm going to do is I'm going to go out there and put a show on for the audience. Like I want to express my art to the audience. I'm going to show them, at that time I was training for 28 years. I'm going to show them 28 years of work. I'm going to just express it. And I was so free. And that was probably the most calm peak I've had ever.
And you know what, Jeff, to be honest with you, that's exactly the way I was.
So to me, this last show. I think what makes bodybuilders, it starts with the mind first. It starts with the mental and the mind, and the body will follow whatever you want it to do. And if you just let yourself be free of like the genetic card and just think going again, like I told you, I was going to harp on this the whole podcast, is just reaching your full potential. Like you're your own canvas, create your art. Okay. Make it the best masterpiece you can, and you're probably most important judge.
Jeff, if you would have said that to me, 2, 3, 4, 10, 15 years ago, I would have nodded and said, yeah, you know what, that's Jeff dropping some wise words, and it would have been one thing to hear that and to listen to it. I've lived it for the first time ever about 3 months ago, you know. I was the most relaxed the night before the show. I didn't even care about what I was eating. You told me to hit 400 grams of carbs. I hit 400 grams of carbs. I sent you pictures. You're like, I think we can go a little bit more. Let's get it 440, 450 in there. I had raisins there. I think a bagel or something like that. And I just had some raisins. And, I was the most relaxed ever. And then up there on stage, 5th out of 6th in the lightweight open. But the best I ever looked. I really feel like that is the best that I have ever looked. And I really feel like that I really maximized my potential at 52 years old.
I was
just going to have to wait to see what happens at 53.
So your genetics, my genetics, totally different. But yet I feel like we accomplished the same exact thing.
Mm-hmm.
And what really matters is like just that. We try to maximize our potential.
That's it.
I don't have nothing else to say.
No, that's a mic drop right there, because you maximized your potential. You won the Pro International. You got 5th at Worlds at 52. I maximized my potential. I got 5th out of 6 in the open class at 52, and I won the Masters overall.
We both got 5th.
Oh, hey, how about that?
There you go. Yeah. See? That's symmetry right there, Brad.
55. But yeah, at the same time, I feel like both of us, we've used this term earlier, acceptance and peace. Like I have never been this peaceful over arguably what some people might say was a semi-successful, but I feel like it was the most successful prep and the most successful I've ever been on the bodybuilding stage.
And next year we're going to be even better because of the mindset.
Sounds good to me, Coach. Sounds good to me.
All right, I think we did it.
Yeah, for sure. So, Jeff, thanks so much for all of the wisdom and all the words. And 3DMJ Nation, thank you for tuning in and listening to the 3D Muscle Journey podcast.